I woke in the middle of the night, feeling a strange presence in the room. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I saw my 3-year-old son, Liam, standing beside my bed. A wide smile stretched across his face. He wasn't giggling or saying anything, just smiling, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I blinked, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. "What are you doing, Liam?" I asked, my voice thick with confusion and a hint of unease. He continued smiling, his face illuminated by a faint sliver of moonlight streaming through the window. "Nothing," he replied, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. His hands were tucked behind his back, hidden from view. "Liam," I said cautiously, "are you hiding something?" "No," he answered, his grin widening in a way that seemed almost unnatural. I sat up, leaning closer to him. My pulse quickened as I caught a glint of metal reflecting in the darkness. Slowly, I reached around him and pulled his hand forward. My breath hitched. He was clutching a large, sharp kitchen knife, his tiny fingers wrapped tightly around the handle. "Liam," I gasped, trying to keep my voice calm. "Where did you get this?" He looked up at me, his expression unchanging. "I needed it," he whispered. "For what?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "To keep them away." I froze, unsure what to make of his words. "Who, Liam?" "The people in my room," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His eyes, dark and serious, seemed far older than his years. I felt a chill settle over me, like the touch of an unseen hand on my shoulder. But before I could ask anything more, he turned and padded out of the room, leaving me clutching the knife, my heart pounding. That night, I barely slept. As I lay awake in bed, haunted by Liam's strange behavior, memories surfaced from years ago, moments that I'd tried to brush off as childish imagination. I thought of my younger brother, Daniel, who had always had an inexplicable fear of water. He was 4 years younger than me, and as kids, we'd play with water guns or splash around in the bathtub. But no matter how much fun we had, there was always a look of terror in his eyes. One night, when Daniel was around 3 or 4, I asked him why he was so afraid of water. I was only a child myself, and as someone who loved swimming, I couldn't understand his fear. He looked up at me, his small face unusually serious, and said, "I was on a big, unsinkable ship. We hit a huge iceberg, and everything got wet and cold. I was really scared, but then I found a warm, shining place. I waited there for my next family to come get me. I remember feeling a shiver of fear, even as a child. My mother had overheard and immediately declared bath time over, wrapping my brother in a towel and taking him out of the room. But I had never forgotten his words. Years later, I did the math. My brother, Daniel, was born on April 15th, 1992. The Titanic sank on April 15th, 1912, exactly 80 years to the day before he was born. I tried to dismiss the memory as a coincidence, but in the wake of Liam's strange behavior, I couldn't shake the feeling that something uncanny was connected between the children in our family. Liam wasn't my only child. I also had a daughter, Anna, who was 6. Unlike Liam, she was full of energy and always chattering away about her imaginary friends and stories she'd make up. But a few weeks ago, she'd said something that sent a chill down my spine. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and said, "Mommy, the girl on the ceiling doesn't like you." I tried to keep my expression neutral. "The girl on the ceiling?" I asked, brushing her hair back gently. "Yes," she whispered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "She watches me when I'm watching movies. And when I sleep, she stays on the ceiling right over my bed." I swallowed, forcing a smile. "What else does she do?" Anna looked thoughtful. "She told me she wants to eat your heart." I pulled back, trying not to show the alarm I felt. "Honey, where did you hear something like that?" Anna shrugged. "I dunno. I just know." I'd brushed it off, thinking it was something she'd picked up from a movie or a story. But that night, I couldn't stop looking at the ceiling, half expecting to see something staring back at me. A few days after Liam's midnight visit with the knife, I noticed something strange in my youngest daughter's room. Claire was only 3, a sweet, quiet child who rarely spoke. But that day, as I walked into her room to pick up her toys, I noticed the floor was damp. "Claire, why is your floor wet?" I asked, frowning as I looked around. She looked up at me with her big, round eyes and said calmly, "I stabbed the fog people. It made them go away." I felt a jolt of fear, my hands going cold. What do you mean, honey?" She looked at me as if I should understand. "They come into my room at night, but I told them to leave, and when they didn't, I stabbed them. Then they went away." Her tone was so matter-of-fact, as if she were describing a game. But I felt a chill as I looked at her innocent face, wondering what she saw that I couldn't. I glanced around the room, but there was nothing there, only the strange dampness that clung to the air. One evening, as I was brushing Liam's teeth, his toothbrush slipped from his hand and fell onto the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and as I straightened, I noticed Liam staring past me, his eyes wide. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why does that man have a knife?" My heart nearly stopped. I spun around, my eyes scanning the empty bathroom behind me. But there was no one there. "What man, Liam?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The man behind you," he said, his voice barely audible. "He's holding a knife, and he's smiling." I felt a rush of cold air, a presence lingering in the bathroom with us. I grabbed Liam and pulled him close, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I looked again, the room was empty, silent, except for the sound of our own breathing. After that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My children were seeing things, knowing things that they shouldn't. Shadows, memories, whispers from another time or another world. It was as if some invisible barrier had broken, letting in things that should have stayed hidden. I began researching, digging into family history, looking for any signs of paranormal experiences, trying to understand why my children seemed haunted by visions of past lives, shadows on the ceiling, fog people, and unseen men with knives. The more I uncovered, the more it felt like we were living in a house with walls that breathed, that held onto memories not just of our lives, but of others who had passed through, leaving behind fragments of their own fears, their own tragedies. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I could almost hear whispers in the silence, telling me that this was only the beginning. After Liam's terrifying words about the man with the knife, I found myself haunted by the possibility that something was indeed wrong in our home. I started waking up at odd hours, compelled by an eerie feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. I'd hear strange noises in the night, the creak of footsteps, the soft hum of whispers, the faint sound of laughter that seemed to fade as soon as I was fully awake. One night, I sat alone in the living room, poring over old family photo albums, trying to see if there was a history of strange events or deaths in our family that could explain my children's unusual visions. I was flipping through pictures of my grandparents when I noticed a face in the background of a photo, a woman, blurry and out of focus, with wild hair and a thin, unsettling smile. I leaned closer, squinting at the figure. She seemed familiar, like I had seen her somewhere before. Suddenly, a memory hit me like a jolt. When I was a child, I'd had a recurring nightmare about a woman with a twisted smile and tangled hair who would stand by my bed and watch me while I slept. I had forgotten about her for years, but now, seeing her face in an old family photo, it all came rushing back. Had she always been there, lurking in the shadows of my family? And was she the same figure haunting my children now? Determined to understand what was happening, I began researching paranormal phenomena, reading everything I could find on spirits, past lives, and haunted memories. The more I read, the more I stumbled upon stories about echoes, imprints of people's souls that linger in places or objects, unable to move on. These echoes, some experts believed, could be drawn to certain families, passed down through generations, affecting children the most. I decided to test the theory by observing my kids closely, trying to see if their behavior changed depending on where they were in the house. Sure enough, I noticed that Liam became especially anxious around the bathroom, while Anna often glanced nervously at the ceiling in her room. Claire, on the other hand, would stare into the hallway with a focused, almost hostile expression, as if she was daring something to approach. One evening, while putting Anna to bed, she looked up at me with those innocent eyes and whispered, "Mommy, the girl on the ceiling says it's not her fault. She just wants you to listen." A chill ran down my spine. "Listen to what, sweetheart?" Anna pointed up, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow flicker across the ceiling. "To her story. She's stuck, Mommy. She's waiting for you to help her." That night, I lay awake, wondering if we were dealing with more than one spirit, each child seeing a different entity, each one bound to our family in ways I couldn't yet understand. In my desperate search for answers, I finally decided to confront my mother, who was the only person left alive from my father's side of the family. She had always been tight-lipped about our family history, brushing off any questions as unnecessary. But this time, I refused to let her evade me. After pressing her for what felt like hours, she finally sighed, her face pale and drained. "There's something you don't know about your grandfather," she said, her voice barely a whisper. My heart pounded as she explained that my grandfather had once been a caretaker in an old mansion, a place known in town for strange occurrences. He had worked there for years, looking after the house and its secrets, and had been rumored to have a gift, the ability to see and communicate with spirits. According to my mother, he had even attempted a seance to help release trapped souls. But something had gone wrong. The spirits he was trying to help grew violent, refusing to leave. Eventually, he left his job, but he always believed the spirits had followed him and his descendants, latching onto our family out of anger or desperation. Hearing this, I felt a dark weight settle over me. My children weren't simply seeing random ghosts, they were seeing spirits tied to my family's history, each with their own tragic story. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was bound to happen. One night, things reached a breaking point. I awoke to find Anna, Liam, and Claire standing in a line at the foot of my bed, each with vacant expressions and eyes fixed on something beyond my sight. "Mommy," Claire whispered, her voice distant. "The fog people are angry. They say we're in their way." I sat up, panic rising. "What do you mean, sweeties?" Anna's voice followed, eerily calm. "They want us to leave. They're tired of waiting." Liam spoke next, his voice barely more than a breath. "They remember you, Mommy. They remember Grandpa. They don't like us here." I swallowed hard, feeling an icy grip of fear in my chest. "Who remembers Liam?" "The ones who were left behind," he whispered, his eyes wide and glassy. "They don't want us here anymore." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and a deep, bone-chilling cold spread through the room. My heart raced as I looked around, feeling an oppressive presence closing in on us, like we were surrounded by invisible watchers. I grabbed my children and pulled them close, whispering reassurances, but inside, I was terrified. The spirits weren't just unhappy, they were furious, and I could feel their rage simmering in the air. Realizing that I had no other choice, I decided to try something drastic. I remembered an old ritual I had read about during my research, a ritual that was supposed to help communicate directly with spirits and offer them a way to find peace. It was risky, but I knew it was our only chance to free ourselves from whatever was haunting us. That night, after putting the children to bed, I set up a small circle of candles in the living room, surrounding myself with items that belonged to my grandfather, things that might help bridge the gap between our world and the spirit realm. I sat cross-legged in the center, focusing all my energy on reaching out to the spirits who had been tormenting us. As I closed my eyes and whispered words I barely understood, the air grew cold and heavy, and a strange whispering filled the room. I opened my eyes to see shadows flickering in the corners, shapes that seemed to grow and shift, as if they were pulling themselves out of the darkness. One by one, I saw them, the fog people, as Claire had called them. Pale, translucent figures with hollow eyes and expressions of sorrow and anger. They were staring at me, waiting, their faces filled with pain. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. A tall, shadowy figure stepped forward. It was a woman, the same woman I had seen in the old family photo, with tangled hair and a twisted smile. Her voice was like a whisper and a scream, both distant and unbearably close. "We want peace," she hissed. "We want freedom from this cursed family. Your grandfather trapped us here, bound us to him and his bloodline. And now we are his legacy." Her words echoed in my mind, a cold realization dawning. My grandfather hadn't just tried to help spirits move on. He had trapped them, chaining them to his descendants as a twisted form of control. "Then go," I whispered, my voice filled with desperation. "I release you. You don't have to stay." The spirits wavered, their shapes growing faint. For a moment, I thought it had worked, that I had finally freed them. But then the woman's twisted smile returned, and she stepped closer, her cold eyes piercing into mine. "You cannot release what is already inside you," she whispered. "We are a part of you now. Forever." With those final, chilling words, the shadows vanished, leaving me alone in the dark, the candles snuffed out by an unseen force.